Moses stood before the people. They were on the edge of a new land. It was a big moment. He knew it. God knew it. And Moses had a lot to say. One last time. His words in the book of Deuteronomy are full of history, warnings, and promises. But one thing comes up again and again. It's a word you can't miss. It's remember. Remember this. Do not forget that. Keep these things in your mind. Hold them in your heart. But why? Why was remembering so important to God? It's not just a nice suggestion. It's a deep, foundational command. It's tied to everything. It's tied to their past, their present, and their future. It's tied to God's very nature and his relationship with them. When God tells them to remember, he isn't just asking them to recall facts. It's more than just a mental exercise. It's about a whole way of living. It's about a posture of the heart. It's about letting the past shape who you are right now. It's about letting it guide your decisions every single day. Think about what they had been through. They were slaves in Egypt for generations. It was a cruel life. They cried out, and God heard them. He sent Moses. He brought plagues on Egypt. He opened the Red Sea. He led them through the wilderness for 40 years. He provided food, water, protection. He gave them his law at Mount Sinai. All of this was real. It happened, and it was all because of God. So, when God says, remember, he wants them to remember these big life-changing events. He wants them to remember how helpless they were without him. He wants them to remember his power. He wants them to remember his faithfulness. He wants them to remember his incredible love for them, a people who often didn't deserve it. This remembering for God was vital for their identity. If they forgot where they came from, if they forgot who rescued them, they would forget who they were. They were not just a random group of people, they were God's chosen people. They were his special possession. They were set apart. This identity was built on their shared history with him. If that history faded, so would their understanding of themselves. And forgetting was a real danger. It's easy to forget when things get good. It's easy to forget when life becomes comfortable. They were about to enter a land flowing with milk and honey, a land with cities they didn't build, vineyards they didn't plant, wells they didn't dig. They would have plenty. And prosperity can be a tricky thing. It can make you feel self-sufficient. It can make you think you did it all yourself. This is exactly what God warned them against. He told them straight up in Deuteronomy chapter 8, when you have eaten and are satisfied, and have built fine houses and live in them, and your herds and flocks multiply, and your silver and gold increase, and all you have is multiplied, then your heart will become proud, and you will forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. This is a huge reason why remembering was important to God. He knew their human nature. He knew they were prone to forget the source of their blessings. He knew they might start taking credit for what he had done. And forgetting him, the giver of all good things, would lead them down a dangerous path. What path is that? The path of idolatry. The land they were going into was full of people who worshipped other gods, gods of wood and stone, gods that were nothing. And these other nations had different ways of living, different customs, different morals. If Israel forgot the one true God, they would be easily swayed. They would start to look around at their neighbors. They would see what they were doing, and they might think, maybe those gods are better for our crops. Maybe they will bring us more wealth. God wanted them to remember so they would stay faithful to him. He wanted them to remember that he is the only God. He is the creator. He is the deliverer. He is the provider. There is no other. Remembering this truth was their shield against the temptations of the surrounding cultures. It was their safeguard against bowing down to false gods. Remembering also connected directly to their obedience. The law God gave them wasn't just a random set of rules. It was a framework for life. It was how they were meant to live as his special people. It reflected his character. It was designed for their good. And remembering God's past acts, remembering his mighty power, remembering his holiness, remembering his covenant with them, was supposed to motivate them to follow his command. If they remembered his mercy in bringing them out of slavery, wouldn't that make them want to be merciful to others? If they remembered his provision in the wilderness, wouldn't that make them trust him with their daily needs? If they remembered his justice against those who rebelled, wouldn't that make them fear him and choose to obey? Yes, remembering these things was meant to deepen their love for God. Deuteronomy is a book about love too. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might, Moses tells them. How do you do that? You do that by remembering his goodness. You do that by remembering all he has done for you. Love isn't just an emotion in the Bible. It's a choice. It's an action. And it's fueled by remembering God's love for you. God wanted them to remember his instructions, not just the big stories. He wanted them to remember the specific laws about how to treat the poor, how to deal with justice, how to celebrate festivals, how to structure their families and communities. These were all part of living as his people. And if they forgot the giver of the law, they would soon forget the law itself, and chaos would follow. The warnings in Deuteronomy are stark. They are very clear. And if they forgot God, if they forgot his commands, there would be consequences, serious ones. They would lose the blessings he promised. They would be driven out of the land. They would suffer. This wasn't because God was mean. It was because forgetting him was a breach of their covenant. It was a rejection of their relationship with him. And relationships, even with God, have terms. So, for God, their remembering was absolutely crucial for their well-being. He wasn't asking them to remember for his benefit in the sense that he would somehow gain something. He is God. He doesn't need anything. He wanted them to remember for their benefit. Yes, he wanted them to remember so they could live full, blessed lives in the land he was giving them. He wanted them to thrive. He wanted them to truly be his people. And this idea of remembering wasn't just for that generation. It was for every generation that followed. God commanded them to teach their children. To talk about these things, when you sit in your house and when you walk on the road and when you lie down and when you get up. This wasn't a casual suggestion, it was an imperative. It was the only way the knowledge and the relationship would continue. Why was it important to God that future generations remember? Because his covenant was not just with the people standing before Moses that day. It was with all the generations to come. He wanted his relationship with Israel to be eternal. And the only way to keep it alive was to pass on the story, to pass on the truth of who he is and what he had done. Every Israelite child needed to hear the story of the Exodus. They needed to know they were once slaves. They needed to know God delivered them. They needed to know the law came from him. They needed to understand the deep, unbreakable connection between their existence and God's faithfulness. If a generation grew up ignorant of these things, then the entire foundation of their faith and their nation would crumble. God established rituals and festivals to help them remember. Passover, for example, was a vivid reenactment of the night they were freed from Egypt. Eating the bitter herbs, the unleavened bread, the lamb, these weren't just meals. They were physical acts of remembering. They were sensory experiences designed to keep the story fresh, to make it real for every person, young and old. He told them to write his words on their doorframes and on their gates. He told them to bind them as symbols on their hands and foreheads. These were constant visual reminders. Every time they walked through a door, they would see his words. Every time they raised their hand, they would see his commands. It was about surrounding themselves with the memory of God and his truth. It was about making remembering a part of the very fabric of their daily lives. Deuteronomy is often called a second law, or a repetition of the law. But it's more than just a repeat. It's a passionate plea. It's Moses pleading with the people, urging them, begging them to take these things seriously. And the heart of that plea is remember. Remember who God is, remember what he has done. Remember what he asks of you. Consider the role of the wilderness journey in remembering. 40 years. A whole generation grew up there. They saw God's daily provision with the manna. They saw his patience with their constant complaining. They saw his justice when people rebelled. This was not just a difficult journey, it was a school. It was a living lesson in dependence on God. And Moses constantly brings up these wilderness experiences, not just as stories, but as lessons to be remembered. Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the desert these 40 years, he says, to humble you and to test you, in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his command. So, remembering was a tool for humility. It kept them from pride. It kept them from thinking they were special or strong on their own. They were a stubborn people. They were stiff-necked. And God, in his grace, put them through a process that was meant to burn these lessons into their very soul. Remembering their own weaknesses, their own failures, and God's consistent faithfulness through it all was crucial for them to walk humbly with him. And for God, remembering also upheld his honor. When his people remembered him, it meant they honored him. It meant they acknowledged him as sovereign. It meant they gave him the glory he deserved. Forgetting him, on the other hand, dishonored him. It was a slap in the face. It was saying, you're not important enough for me to keep in mind. It's about trust too. If you remember God's past faithfulness, it builds trust for the future. They were about to face big, strong nations in the land. They needed to conquer them. That would require immense faith and courage. Where would that faith come from? From remembering. Remembering how God defeated the Egyptians. Remembering how he provided water from a rock. Remembering that he always keeps his promises. Their past experiences with God were meant to be a wellspring of confidence for the challenges ahead. God is not forgetful. He never forgets his covenant. He never forgets his promises. But he knows we humans are. We are prone to distraction. We are prone to letting the urgent crowd out the important. We are prone to letting new experiences overwrite old memories. And so he built this entire system of remembering into their lives. Not because he needed the reminder, but because they desperately did. The consequences of forgetting, as laid out in Deuteronomy, are not just about punishment. They are about the natural outcome of breaking a relationship. If you forget who someone is and what they've done for you, you stop honoring them. You stop obeying them. You stop loving them. And eventually the relationship breaks down. God didn't want that for Israel. He wanted a vibrant, living, enduring relationship with them. And remembering was the key to that. It was about understanding his holiness. Remembering his commands, remembering the seriousness of the covenant at Sinai, reminded them that God is not like them. He is set apart. He is holy. And because he is holy, he requires holiness from his people. Forgetting this would lead to a casual attitude towards sin, a disregard for his standards, and ultimately a breakdown of the moral order he intended for them. And finally, remembering was about hope. As Moses neared the end of his life, he talked about both blessings and curses. He laid out the dire consequences of forgetting God, but he also spoke of future repentance and restoration. Even if they forgot God and were scattered among the nations, if they turned back to him with all their heart and soul and remembered his commands, he would gather them again. This is a profound statement. Even in the face of their inevitable future failures, remembering held the key to their eventual restoration. So, when we read Deuteronomy, we see that remembering is not a minor theme. It is the theme. It is the thread that ties everything together. It is how God's character is understood. It is how their identity is formed. It is how their obedience is secured. It is how their future is protected. And it is how their relationship with the living God endures. It's a deep personal call from God to his people, asking them to keep him and all he has done at the very center of their existence, always.